So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first of the Training Manufacturing Group's webinars. This is the first in a series that we're running supporting UK manufacturing. My name is Neil Lloyd, so I'm the chair of the Training Manufacturing Group, and today I'm joined by Tracy Worthington, who's an employment partner at FBC Mamie Bowdler, and Richard Jenkins, who's area director at Lloyds Bank. I think, Richard, is that right?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Yeah, marvellous. Before we start, I just wanted to do a little bit more about the Training Manufacturing Group. So just share a few slides with you. Hang on. So the Training Manufacturing Group was formed in 2015, and it supports SME manufacturers and gives them access to technology, training and business support. We've got 8 technical partners who offer their resources, expertise and provide members with access to world-class equipment and engineering technologies. And there are a range of benefits from being a member, and these are just some of them. And members also get an assigned client manager who support them and ensure they get the most out of their membership. And I'm pleased to see we're joined by a few of those today as well. For more information about joining Training Manufacturing Group, you can visit us on the internet. We're incomtmg.co.uk. So that piece over. So I'm going to start today's webinar by handing across to Tracy, who's going to give us a bit of an update on furlough. If, as Tracy's speaking, you've got any questions, then please put them into the chat area. We have received some already when people pre-registered, so get ready, Tracy. I've got a few for you.
Okay, thank you, Neil. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can all hear me. I've been asked to talk for about 10 minutes, basically on furlough, but generally what is the big issue in employment at the moment, which is obviously anything to do with COVID-19, which is not just furlough, but obviously the recovery strategy which came out in May. I feel for you as employers because obviously there has been so much change and so rapidly has it come out in the various guidances and notes from both the government and from the Treasury. For example, I think we've had to date about 8 or 9 updates on furlough. Now, the most recent one came from the Chancellor on the 29th of May. And as we've seen the pattern here, they give us the headlines, but the detail doesn't come out until later. So on the 29th of May, he has announced, as I think most of you are aware, that the furlough scheme will come to an end at the end of October. And as from July, originally it was going to be August, but as from July, we can start bringing employees back part-time. But as usual, we haven't got the detail. I read an article today that said the detail on the revised rules relating to furlough is due out on the 12th of June. We've also now got the long-awaited change with regards to the payments that you, the employer, are going to now have to make towards furlough. From August, you're going to have to pay national insurance and pension contributions. And then from August, from September, you're paying 10% towards the furlough pay. And from October, you're paying 20%. Now, a key date that you must bear in mind is that as from the 10th of June, the scheme is closed to new employees. So if you've got any employees who you haven't already furloughed and you're thinking about doing it, you must do it before the 10th of June to activate the grant scheme. Now, furlough has brought up numerous new issues that perhaps some of us haven't been aware of. For example, you have what's called furlough fear, which is for those employees who've been furloughed, some of them since March and could be up until October, who are fearful as to why they have been, say, selected for furlough when their other colleagues are going back into work. There's lots of issues about anxiety and concern about being furloughed for so long. We are in, obviously, a new area. But I think you must be careful to ensure that you are keeping in touch with your employees who are being furloughed. Is it me, or is there a bit of feedback that somebody else is hearing?
So my neighbour has just decided to chainsaw the tree down, so I apologise.
Sorry about that. Okay. All right. So, as I said, keeping in touch with your employers is really important. And I appreciate that's for manufacturing. That may be more difficult than, say, the professions where we've got employees who've got access to, laptops, computers, we can Zoom and do team meetings. There's loads of articles on the internet about how to keep in touch with your staff. And I really applaud you and encourage you to do that if you're not doing it already. We've already seen, as probably expected, furlough fraud. There have been over 700 cases already reported to HMRC of employers who have been abusing the system. We knew it was going to happen, and it's already started. There have been reported cases of employees who've actually been working, and then when they've looked at their pay packet, find that they've only been paid 80%, but nobody told them they'd actually been furloughed because they were working. So abuse is going on, and they will be reported, and the government have made it very clear they're going to take a very dim view, quite rightly, of such fraud. We've now had clarity from the government on holidays, and if you haven't already, I strongly encourage you to look at your employees who've been on furlough and find out, are they actually taking their holiday? Now, if you've got set holiday periods, then you probably have already advised employees that even on furlough, they will still be expected to take their holiday whilst on furlough leave. And the government have confirmed that's acceptable. But if you haven't, and you operate on a more flexible holiday basis, that the employee requests holiday, then we've done at FBC, if you've already booked your holiday, you're expected to take it. And it may come a point that the government have now confirmed that you can force employees to take holiday. Because it'd be really galling, wouldn't it, having employees coming back, say, in October, and then suddenly saying, I've got 15 days holiday to take by the end of December. So I think as a good exercise, have a look at all your employees, look what holiday they've taken. And then if you want to, you could force the employees to take holiday at a certain time. Now, the requirements are that you have to give twice as much notice as the holiday you're expecting them to take. So, for example, if you want them to take 5 days holiday, you give them 10 days notice. However, a word of caution with employees who have perhaps childcare responsibilities. If they have the ability to take holiday when they request, then they probably want to take holiday during the school holidays. So rather than forcing holidays on them, what you might want to do is to contact those employees and say, the government has given us the right and has confirmed that we can require you to take holidays during a certain period of time. However, rather than forcing you to do so at this stage, could you let us know by a certain date when you'll be taking holiday between now and, say, the end of August? And that way, hopefully, you'll get the result you want. But if employees still refuse or don't cooperate with you, then obviously then you could enforce that holiday if you wanted to. The big issue, however, at the moment, and I think most of us are familiar with furlough and how it's going to work, is the COVID recovery strategy. And this came out on the 13th of May, and obviously the government's risk assessments, which relate to the issues thrown up by COVID-19. Now, the government has produced 8 workplace settings of the risk assessments expected in relation to the different categories of employer. You are required to carry out these risk assessments in addition to obviously the risk assessments you would do as normal health and safety requirements. Now, it's really important obviously that you do these risk assessments, and the government has advised that you must do them in conjunction with your employees, or if you recognise a union, with the union, because that way you're going to get more buy-in from the staff as a general point. But also it's going to be helpful later on if you've got employees who perhaps are reluctant to come back to work, if they've seen that the employees who are on the coalface and know what's going on have actually bought into it and agreed with the employer what would be the reasonable measures to take in relation to that risk assessment. Now, the government has not produced a risk assessment template to use, but apparently if you go onto HSE Northern Ireland or CIPD, there's some useful starting point templates for you that you could perhaps crib and adapt as needs be. However, be careful, one size does not fit all here. Your risk assessment has to be specific not just to the whole industry, the whole workforce, but it has to be specific to individuals, to certain machines, certain parts of the factory. So you must ensure that the risk assessments are bespoke to some extent. I had a client recently who did one risk assessment for the whole factory didn't take into account there was particular vulnerable employees who had heart conditions, and therefore the risk assessment did not address what needed to be done pursuant to the COVID recovery strategy. And as such, therefore, the employee was refusing to go back to work. As part of this recovery strategy, you're required to download your notice, which you get off the government website, to say that you are COVID-19 secure. And on this notice, there should be reference to the HSE phone number the employees can use if they think that you are not complying with your requirements for risk assessment. The government has also said that if you employ more than 50 employees, you should be putting your risk assessments on your website. That's not your intranet, but your website. The union are particularly fond, I know, of trying to make employers a bit like gender pay gap reporting to put it on the website. There's no legal requirement to do so, but it's deemed to be good practice if you could. After I finish my talk, I'll ask Neil to explain what we at FBC have been doing to do the risk assessments in particular areas, which perhaps may be useful to some of you, say in office environments or things like that. One of the questions that we're getting commonly asked at the moment is looking forward that when furlough ends, now we know it's going to end in October, is pay and hours, because employers realise that the tap is not going to get turned on immediately, and things aren't going to go straight back to normal. And when the furlough cushion goes, we're still going to have a problem with cash flow and paying our staff. So pay reductions, hour reductions, it's the basic situation of that is a variation in contract. You will need the employee's consent. If some of you cast your minds back to 2009 when we had the banking crisis, a lot of employers then adopted a 4-day week. Employees were reluctant often to take that 4-day week, but you often find through a period of consultation, you can get them to agree, and you have to put it in writing that they agree to that variation. Often employees obviously can't say they can't afford to take the reduction, but when you point out to them that obviously 4 days a week money is a lot more than getting on employment support allowance or universal credit, the penny does often drop and you get that consent. But if you did have the situation where you had employees who just flatly refused to accept the variation, then you do have tools at your disposal where you could probably argue that if the employee refused to accept the variation and reduce their hours or their pay, that you would ultimately give them notice to terminate. And the reason would be for what's called some other substantial reason. That is your defence to why you were doing require the variation. And in the current climate, I would suspect that you would get away with that defence quite readily. The other big issue, which obviously is on the horizon at the moment, on the horizon, it's already started to emerge quite rapidly, is the R word, redundancy. I suspect most of you know how to do a redundancy procedure. I'm sure with the current climate, you'll have no difficulty in proving that the requirements to do work of a particular kind have ceased or diminished, which is the definition of redundancy, and you know the procedure that is required. Obviously, if you're looking to make 20 or more people redundant in a 90-day period, you've got to do group consultation as well as individual consultation. Don't forget also that you've got the issue with notifying the Department of Business and Energy before you start group consultation by filling in a HR1 form that you are proposing to make over 20 people redundant. So that's the quick run through of where we are at the moment. Obviously, you have to keep your eye on the government website all the time because it's changing the landscape. Just one quick point, even though we have the recovery strategy, the basic line at the moment is where possible, employees should still work from home. That's the situation we're in. So if you've got employees working from home, have you checked your employer's liability insurance policy? And does that cover employees working from home? Employees may have their own liability, their own insurance policy, but I suspect that won't cover home working. But you as an employer obviously have to have insurance, so check that it does cover home working. You should be doing risk assessments for employees who are working from home, and ACAS have recently produced a very good guide on working from home. And then finally, if you haven't already done so, it's always good to have a policy on these things. So that's my little section finished with. I'll just go back to Neil and ask him if he could just do a quick run through of the sort of steps we've taken at FBC, particularly with our office environments and getting people back into work. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tracy. Several questions have come through as well. Hopefully the neighbours finished chopping down the tree, so it should be okay. Yeah, so we opened our offices to clients for appointments only, and so by appointment only, sorry, and also for our support staff to come back because they had rather than having laptops, they had sort of bulky desktops with cables running through houses. So we did start with doing the risk assessment. I think we downloaded the one from the HSE website and then adapted it to our purposes. So if you now walk in, you'll see the measures that I think you'd expect to see in an office environment. So we've got plastic screening up and around reception. We've got specific entrance and exit points. We have hand sanitizers on entrance and exit points, sanitizers in all the meeting rooms. We have PPE available for clients and for our staff if they so wish to wear it. We have a one-way system, and then we've made changes that are simple changes. Like, so we've removed everybody's waste bins, just so that we can reduce the amount of handling that the cleaners have got to do to the touch points, and about chopping the tree down again. So, and we did do the consultation with staff, as you suggested. We held that a couple of days before we reopened, to run through the plans and to let them know what we've done to keep them safe and their families safe and our clients. And touch wood, it's gone okay so far this week. I've got some questions, so I'll ask you the questions and I'll mute my button while he chops his tree down. So an interesting one for us, so we're in Wolverhampton and Jaguar Land Rover are just up the road, so they've made the press a fair bit about temperature checking staff. Now I didn't fancy standing there with a thermometer, but I think there's technology now that we can scan you when you come in. Anything that people need to be wary about? Is that a good thing to do? Or?
I think it's a bit like the face mask in some ways. I think employers have seized on this as a way of trying to demonstrate that they are taking risk assessing our employees, causing a risk in the workplace by coming in being potentially infected. If you are going to temperature check employees, you do need their consent, because either that's been given in the contract, probably not, or is it implied? For example, have you got a drugs testing policy or that refers to taking tests in some ways? Probably not. So most employers have been compliant with it, or having allowing for temperature testing. How accurate it is, I would query. You know, people do have varying temperatures, don't they? It doesn't necessarily mean that they've got COVID. The ICO have said that you can ask an employee if they have got any symptoms. And obviously, if you are going to collect the temperature data, you need to do so in a way that obviously respects people's privacy, and that data, if they show that they do not have a temperature, that is immediately destroyed, because obviously there's no need to keep that data. So I personally think it has a limited application. If you do it, as I said, you will need consent to do it. If an employee refuses to give that consent, could you discipline them? Probably not, because I know the employer would argue, well, you know, for health and safety reasons, that's why we're doing it. But are there other methods that you could be undertaking to establish whether the employee actually has got a temperature or not, or has got the symptoms of COVID? Because that's what you're doing, is to try and find out if they got COVID symptoms, haven't you? So yeah, I think it's got limited application. I know it's big. A lot of the big organisations are doing it. I do question it's basically if it's an effective tool to get to the answer that you need.
And I guess part of the issue, I guess, with the virus as it is actually you can have it, but show no signs of having it whatsoever anyway, can't you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There is some stats I've seen that said between 5 and 80% of the public could have it and not realise. So, you know, what's your temperature testing going to show you? I think there's the idea, if you could do more of a proper swab test, which is like what they're doing in the health service, that's a different issue. But that's not really being encouraged at the moment, and that would be expensive, and you'd probably have to get an outside professional organisation to do it anyway, because it's obviously a more technical test. I know the Football Association have said that they were going to look to do swabs twice a week to give reassurance that, you know, were there any issues, but most employers, that would be a step too far.
Yeah. Okay. So when you've so if like us, we've put extensive procedures in place, ask those that really can't work from home to come back in. If somebody refuses, is that a disciplinary offence, or where do we stand on that?
Right. The starting point is to find out why they're refusing to come back in. You know, is it because they are vulnerable? Are they shielding? What is the reason that they're not coming in? Assuming it's none of those, and it's just that they are a bit anxious about coming in and are worried that you, the employer, have not done enough to protect their environment, because obviously as an employer, you have a duty to provide them with a safe environment in which to work. Then if you can point to your COVID risk recovery strategy assessments, that you've done those in line with the government guidance, that's going to get you a long way of showing that you have acted reasonably in getting the employee back to work. So what is the reason for their concern? The problem you've got is that employees have the right, under the Employment Rights Act, if they perceive that if they have a reasonable belief there is a serious and imminent danger in the workplace, to either walk out of the workplace or not to come back to work. And it's the employee's perception, not the employer's. Now, it's not been tested yet, and I'm sure it will get tested, because this is a question that's coming up time and time again. You as an employer have to show that you've done all that you reasonably possibly can, and that's why we have a nod obviously to the government guidance. And if you've obviously worked with your employee committee for health and safety, again, that's going to be another step in showing that you've done all you can. But as I said earlier, if you've got employees who are vulnerable, have you risk assessed in relation to them particularly? Subject to that though, if you've done all you reasonably can, and you think the employee is being over the top cautious, unnecessary and cautious, unreasonably cautious about coming back to work, then the answer is yes, you would be looking at potentially disciplining them. But if you read any of the guidance on this, and there's loads on the internet from law firms and CIPD, they are really reluctant about you taking any disciplinary action with employees. That's really the last chance saloon. They want you to talk it through the employees, understand the concerns, and try and find a way forward. But yeah, disciplinary should be the last throw of the dice on this.
Brilliant, thank you. One final question for you.
Yeah.
Manufacturer has employees that car share.
Right.
I think something you do as well. Can they insist that they don't car share? Is that the risk?
That's an interesting one. I did read earlier about if you are car sharing, would that be a good ground for perhaps wearing masks? You know, because you're not socially distancing, are you? Although the effectiveness of masks is obviously another issue. If you're car sharing, you're going to obviously infringe the social distancing rules, aren't you? Unless you've got a very big car. The employees taking it upon themselves to come into work, aren't they? And that's the mode that they've chosen to do. I suppose if you said, well, can you dictate to them that they can't car share? Probably not, because obviously they're doing it outside of work. If they then said, well, if I can't car share, I can't come into work, then that's opening another can of worms, isn't it, altogether? And obviously there's issues with public transport, which I know there's certain employees we've got at work who don't really want to come back into work because they're concerned about using public transport. So we've said we'll carry on working from home. And that's what the government advice has been, that if you can't use public transport and they prefer you not to, see if you can work from home. But that's not always an option. I understand that. I suppose if the employee wants to take that risk, is that their risk to take? You know, have they carried it out have they done as many measures as possible? Is it all wiped down the car before they get in, when they get out? It's a difficult one. Do we just push the obligation back on the employee? But I suppose then you're asking employees to tell you if they've got temperature, are they showing any symptoms? And if you keep repeating that mantra that they should keep you well advised, I don't see what else you can really do. If they choose to take that risk, you know, is it any different to them being at home with their family? I don't know. It's not an easy one to work out, that one. I suppose if they take the choice of doing it, how can you really stop them? So not the perfect answer, I'm sorry.
That's all right. Thank you very much for that. It was really a comprehensive update. Your details are on our website if people want to get hold of you, aren't they?
Thank you.
Yeah, brilliant. Richard.
Hi.
Man with the money. Could you, so I guess support from banks has been available now for sort of 10, 12 weeks, but could you just start with a bit of a summary about what is available for SMEs? And I guess from a government sort of products, but also what you're seeing, what your bank is doing and what other banks are doing on their own facilities?
Yeah, so obviously, if we take a step back, businesses were beginning to see some cash constraints, probably towards the end of February. So we were already looking at what we would have termed then as business as usual support through increased invoice discounting lines, additional support through overdrafts, and indeed some loan requests were coming in at that point. Then on the 23rd of March at 4:30 a.m., the government launched their new support series of support packages and dropped it on the banks. The same time, it dropped it out to the wider market for SMEs and larger businesses to kind of try and source these funds. It's fair to say the first couple of weeks after that was quite difficult for all of the banks. Lloyds did come in for some significant criticism at that point. We were probably a little bit slower to get off the ground. But since then, I've received significant amounts of positive media for the work that we've done. And I don't know if you've, people on the call might be seeing the Lloyds advert that's showing on commercial television at the moment, where Richard King from the Bull's Head in Chelmarsh is starring in the latest Lloyds advert. So it's one of the local businesses that we've supported. And you'll see the glossies with Walsall wheelbarrows, for example, on big spreads in the likes of the Sunday Times and Telegraph and stuff like that. So clearly the government support through the British Business Bank has evolved quite considerably since that first date of the 23rd of March, when the coronavirus business interruption loan was launched for SMEs. So that's the primary product facing into the SME space. So far, for example, speaking personally for Lloyds, because the stats are not out there for the other banks or shared with us, we've approved 7,000 applications, well over £1 billion now. And for those who follow me on LinkedIn will have seen we've done probably close now to 120 of those applications for businesses across the Black Country and into Shropshire. Then the products evolved into the bounce back loans, which was the one that was kind of weighted, particularly by smaller SMEs. And that proved to be huge demand. In the first 24 hours, from application to cash for Lloyds, we paid out over £1 billion in the first 24 hours of the bounce back schemes going live. So far, we've done 160,000 of those now, and close to £5 billion has gone out to SMEs. And then obviously the larger scheme was launched for those businesses in the mid-corporate space and large corporate space with turnovers greater than 45 million, called the CL Bill scheme. And we've done about 25 of those to date, about 200 million. Alongside that, clearly we've done 47,000 to 50,000 fee-free overdrafts and hundreds of thousands of capital repayment holidays. So what it's been about helping businesses. I mean, we operate on a mantra of survive, revive, and thrive. Okay, so that first kind of iteration is really the period that we're kind of close to coming to the end of now in helping businesses survive. And the key to that was to protect the cash for businesses, to allow them to have suitable cash available for all of their eventualities. We're now beginning to look and revive and move into the revive stage, and how businesses can begin to revive their fortunes. and begin to see how they can work with their supply chains and others to really begin to determine how they can get their business back up and trading. So, for example, we've just done a survey of manufacturing businesses. 27% of them are actively considering their supply chain mechanisms, specifically with on-sourcing to the UK. Now, I don't know whether that's a nod to the increased commentary around Brexit at the moment. But we've also know 1 in 3 businesses have changed their investment plans for the next 18 months as well. So I think a lot of manufacturers are going to sweat assets and not necessarily replace them in the short to medium term. And that does present some additional challenges for banks as capital repayment holidays come to an end and kits becoming older, but perhaps not with the replacement strategy that we would anticipate businesses taking forward.
Remember I'm on mute. So I know, you know, at FBC we've used some of those. Certainly the having the additional overdraft has been useful, and the payment holidays on loans and asset finance has been welcome. There are lots of, what I do see in the press is that lots more banks and financial institutions are being approved to do, say, bounce back loans, and they're advertising it. I assume the best advice is to go to your bank rather than another one, but you know, if you had a view on that.
Again, I mean, every SME listening to this will have a primary bank. The banks, the main, and obviously the challenge for government is to try and get more people banking with the new emerging digital banks, etc. What we're telling everybody, all of our clients and professional contacts, is the first port of call should be your existing bank. You know, it's no surprise to anyone that the banks run very, very enhanced risk models, a lot of it driven by AI, and that gives us a very comprehensive line of sight into the history of that customer, and in particular how they operate their account from a cash management perspective. For bounce back loans, that is the primary deciding factor for Lloyds when we agree them. It's an AI process, which we simply don't have, and the other banks won't have for new to bank customers. Allied to that, clearly there's a whole host of legislation around account opening, as you yourself know, Neil. KYC and anti-money laundering checks, they do take considerable time. And Lloyds, like a number of other main banks, have taken a lot of the resources away that would traditionally look at that and moved them to support the customer-facing relationship teams at the moment to process the route to cash for these businesses that needed these loans. So account opening for new to bank is really slow for us. And I know from sitting in on the LEP calls and stuff like that with other banks involved, it's exactly the same for the other banks at the moment. So the first point of call is very much your existing bank. In terms of the other providers coming forward now, there are a number that will provide both CBIL and bounce back loans. BCRS, for example, locally, and Funding Circle and the like are all available for kind of that non-transactional relationship. So in other words, you don't have to have a previous relationship with those providers to be able to get a route to cash through those as well.
And has the government put caps on the amount of money that is available? So, because they have been around for 10 weeks, so is it running out and getting quick, or is it needs based?
No, I mean, at the end of the day, we have to bear in mind that the government's not putting this money out. Okay, it's coming onto the bank balance sheets. What the government are providing in the case of a bounce back loan is 100% guarantee. In the case of a CBIL, an 80% guarantee. But the key thing to remind all SMEs is that the borrower remains liable for the debt. Okay, there is a significant degree of misconception, and indeed with some MPs that I've had conversations with, that they believe it's free money and SMEs can access that as is their right because the government's supporting it. the key thing is, and we learned this in 2008-9 with the Enterprise Finance Guarantee Scheme that was kind of relaunched at that point. The client is still responsible for the repayment of that debt, and I would urge any SME that is going down the route of borrowing under these schemes to make sure that they work with their professional advisors to ensure that they can afford what is a very rapid repayment profile for these loans once the capital and interest holiday finishes after 12 months. There is a maximum repayment thereafter of 5 years. And there are some significant demands on businesses to generate the cash to repay that borrowing. So that is really important that, that businesses are aware of that.
Brilliant, thanks. And in terms of applying, so I, coming from a banking background, so I'm assuming balance sheet, profit and loss, cash flow forecasts. Is there anything else you could, what would your perfect suite of information be?
The perfect suite of information, the scheme did change, okay? So the British Business Bank rules, so they're a subsidiary of Bayes, their rules tweaked after about 3 weeks, simply because a lot of the banks were asking for cash flow forecasts on a look forward basis to see how businesses could return to profitability and cash generation to repay the borrowing. So that was part of our assessment at that time. British Business Bank then, under the Civil scheme, removed that requirement and moved it purely to a look-back basis. So essentially, the last 3 years certified or audited information would determine the level of sustainability of repayment of that loan. Okay, and that's what we've done. Now, clearly, the best advice to any business at the moment is if you've applied for and been successful for these loans and got the cash, that is absolutely brilliant. If you're thinking about it as well, the same message is to both cohorts, is really maintain a very strong look forward basis, working with your professional advisors, understand how you're going to generate cash and understand how you're going to return to a profitable basis. Because those loans will need to start being repaid on or around the 12-month anniversary. So whilst it isn't mandatory to produce a cash flow forecast to access the schemes, I would strongly recommend that businesses do have a weather eye to the next 6 to 18 months of trading, which will be a critical period for every business, really.
Brilliant. Thank you, Richard. Very good, good lot of information. Can I thank you both for your time this afternoon? Richard, the best way to get hold of you, LinkedIn?
LinkedIn, yes. Just one point, actually, in terms of the schemes. The British Business Bank, obviously, which underpins the criteria for this, the original availability of the scheme was 6 months. Okay, so that launched on the 23rd of March. So it's just to be mindful that they said a 6-month term that these schemes would be available. We've got no updates since then. So if you are kind of thinking, well, I haven't taken one, do I need to? Just bear in mind that there is a sort of deadline of around about mid-September currently, but that may change, obviously.
Brilliant, thank you.
But I'm happy, if you want to put my contact details out to the members, I've got no issues with that, yeah. But otherwise through LinkedIn, otherwise.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks again for both joining us on our first webinar.
Neil, can I just say, I did a quick check while Richard was speaking, and the Department of Transport have issued guidance on car sharing.
Go on in, go for it.
Go on to there if you want to look at it. Basically, it says don't do it, but if you have to, where it's possible, take steps to minimise the risk of infection. Which is
okay, fantastic. I did have another question come in, as we, which was, if you know somebody's not adhering to the government guidelines, can you stop them from coming into work? Facebook's always a good source of those stories.
Well, again, the starting point is why are they not adhering to them?
Yeah.
That's the question, why. And if it's just cavalier, can't be bothered, just it's the way I'm doing it, then that would be disobeying a lawful instruction straight into disciplinary. So, yeah.
Right, there you go. Final time. Thank you very much. Thanks for putting up with the tree being shut down next door. and hope to see all the members in another webinar in a couple of weeks. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.